Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here at the Foreign Correspondents Club. I'm Mary Corbett. I'll be moderating today. I'm very happy to introduce you to Mr. Glen Wood, sitting next to me, and Mr. Langley from Langley, Esquire, today to talk about, obviously you are here because you know something of the case, but the more I hear, the more complex it is. And I think Mr. Wood giving us a timeline and all the issues that are involved here, not simply of a paternity or a reverse harassment case or anything like that. It is truly complex. And I think we are very lucky to have with us Mr. Yoshiatsu Imaizumi, his lawyer, who is a labor expert. And they will all be happy to take your questions afterwards. So let's go straight into Mr. Wood's story, if you will.
I'll allow Timothy to give a brief introduction.
Okay, just to catch you up, last week in the Tokyo District Court, Mr. Glen Wood filed a paternity harassment suit against Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley. This is a civil suit. It is actually a petition for temporary injunction for what is constructive dismissal. Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley put him on forced suspension in late August, and action was filed just last week. That's the purpose of this press briefing. We apologize. The papers were filed last week. It took us about a week to arrange this this press conference today. 6 years ago, Mr. Wood was hired by Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley to recreate their equities division. He is the architect of their global equities team, and he's one of the senior members of the operation there. He's a graduate of Wharton School, and his pedigree includes significant time at Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, and what was the first one here?
Mizuho?
What was it?
Mizuho?
Mizuho Bank, thank you. He's been at Mitsubishi UFJ for 6 years, as I said earlier. In July of 2015, Glen Wood's partner became pregnant with his child, and he announced that to his company and began to make arrangements for the later birth of his child, and began to run into significant difficulties, apparently, with the company. If you are infirm in any way or unable to present 100% of your effort to the company or to your duties, it is frowned upon, and in particular, the birth of a baby, his came prematurely, so it began to take more of his time. Even before he knew that, though, the process of getting leave to have his child was stymied. In October of 2015, his child was born 6 weeks premature, and he was forced to do menial work as an excuse to keep him from leaving for the airport to go visit his child. He kept getting insistent calls from his doctor. His child was on the verge of death, and still he was asked to do menial work. He eventually just left his office and was put on unpaid leave. He returned and was forced to give blood samples and DNA analysis for proof of his fatherhood of the child, and it was just one thing right after another. In the meantime, his job and his position was eroded purposefully and incrementally by the bank, by senior management, Japanese senior management, and ultimately in December of last year, in a meeting with management, he laid out his advice to the company to stop and cease and desist, and that was basically ignored by the company throughout a period of negotiations spanning about 9 months. Eventually, 2 months ago, the company forced him into a semi-retirement with no pay. The salient points of this case are that Glen Wood is a single father. He's a single parent. And specifically and solely because of the fact that he decided to have a child, the company diminished his job and harassed him until he became actually sick and ill and had to take time off from the duties of the job. I'd like to open it for questioning now for those that you might have for Mr. Wood. Thank you very much. You have an opening statement?
I'm happy to give some further details to what Timothy has said. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming today. Really appreciate the support on this. And again, I got to the point where I saw a lot of women in the company going through this and suffering with this, and I got to the point where I couldn't stay silent any longer. First of all, my lawyer, Mr. Imaizumi, has done an excellent job, and he's very happy to answer your questions or give you details about the legal papers and some of the evidence that we've accumulated. Mr. Langley of Langley, Esquire, has extensive history in dealing with these types of situations, as well as you may have known from the press in the past with the likes of the Goldman Sachs case. So Timothy has been with me since the beginning, helping and advising. So thank you very much to Timothy. Just a few additional details to what Timothy said. I joined the company, as he mentioned, to rebuild the equities team, the global equities team, in 2012. And from the beginning, we completely redid contracts. We rearranged the way the business was being done. And we started to see results immediately, and that's reflected in the legal documents. In fact, revenues under my leadership more than doubled during the time I was there. Obviously, it's the team efforts, but I'm very happy to say that it was a very successful 6 years in terms of revenues for the company. It was really when I mentioned I knew that the pregnancy was a difficult one, and from the beginning it was touch and go. And so when I mentioned this to HR and let them know that I may need to take some time off, it was literally from that day that that the attitudes within the company changed. And I was really shocked, to be honest. You know, I've been living and studying about Japan for about 30 years now. And I've read about these issues many, many times, and I've known that people have these types of struggles in companies, in corporate Japan, in particular Zaibatsu-related companies probably. But when it hit me, frankly, it was a shock, and it still is. So, as Timothy mentioned, my son, I applied for paternity leave, even though the company said I wasn't eligible for it. I applied for paternity leave after consulting with a lawyer and actually speaking with Hello Work, the office that controls the administrative part of paternity and maternity leave in Japan. My application was rejected several times on technical grounds. One of the reasons, for example, was I didn't have a boshitecho. Boshitecho is the document that Japanese hospitals give mothers when they first become pregnant in Japan. Obviously, overseas, there's no such thing. So because I couldn't provide that, they rejected my application. Then it was rejected. I told them I would provide a DNA test after the baby was born, and that application was also rejected. The baby came 6 weeks early. The doctors phoned me from overseas and said it's touch and go. He's got a feeding tube, and we don't know if he's going to make it or not. You must come immediately. I went in and told management and HR that, and they basically said, you can't go. So I sat and worked on some rather meaningless spreadsheet while my son was potentially dying in the hospital. After 2 days of doing that, I really couldn't take it anymore, and I told them I was leaving. So I left without permission to go and be with my son. So he was born on the 26th of October, 2015.
His birthday was last week.
I arrived to see him on October 31st because I was not allowed to leave the company. Eventually, after many legal discussions and actually going to the Ministry of Labor and getting their opinion on the issue, the company decided they would grant paternity leave in December, so a couple months after the baby was born. And the time before that was just considered absent from the company. So they didn't go back and approve it from the beginning, but they approved it on a conditional basis from December. I returned to the company 3 months later. I hired a nurse to take care of my son, and as a single father, it was very challenging. But I loved my job. I loved my career. I made the proper arrangements to be able to return to work, and I returned 3 months later in March. Upon returning to the company, the day after, my boss called me in and basically said, "This is your new job," and it's basically sitting in the corner and counting nickels type of arrangement, which was extraordinarily discouraging, and I frankly was quite upset about it from the beginning. I talked with them about it. I talked with HR about it. The situation did not get better. In fact, it continued to get worse. And finally, as Timothy mentioned, I had a meeting in December of last year and laid it all out for them and said, "This just can't continue. I'm becoming ill. Please do something." And to which I received virtually no response. My doctor then ordered me to take time out of the company because after falling over a couple of times, he basically said, "You're not going to make it unless you take some time off." So I handed in a doctor's order for a holiday, for sick leave, in January of this year. And after a few months out of the company, I got much better. The doctor agreed that I could go back to work. I handed in that notice from the doctor to the company. I then met with the company doctor, who also said, "Yes, you're fine to come back to work." And then when we met with the company, they basically said, "No, we're not going to let you back unless you take this job." Again, it was a complete demotion. My compensation was cut by more than 50%. And they said, "You either accept this or we won't have you back." At which point I said, "I will not accept it." And then we got a call from their lawyer. And that's when I needed to get a lawyer. And that's where the discussion began. So as Timothy mentioned, I'm currently on unpaid leave. It seems to be a very clever move of the company. It leaves me in a very precarious position, not being a full-time permanent resident of Japan. My visa is dependent on my salary, not having a job. The visa of the nurse, the surrogate mother, basically, for my son, he's the only mother my son has ever known, also is dependent on me having a salary. So we will both be out of a visa before long and be forced to leave Japan. That's another part of our claim to the court, is that we ask that my job be restored, that my salary be restored. And that's the basic court filing that we've filed at this point. I think some interesting, that's the basic outline of the issue here. Some points I'd like to highlight. Mitsubishi Group of late, through Hirano Shacho, the president of the group, has made it very clear in the newspapers that the goal of the company is to become a global financial institution. They're focused on M&A. They are focused on, the motto of the company is to be the most trusted global financial institution in the world. They've bought Union Bank in California, so Union Bank is now a Mitsubishi entity. They also have a large stake in Morgan Stanley. As you know, Morgan Stanley also has a stake in my company. And frankly, I just can't imagine, as these two corporate cultures come together, that the gap is just so large. I can't imagine it being one big happy family type of scenario. So I think that is a key point. This issue goes beyond me, as I mentioned in the beginning. It's about many in the company who suffer such a fate, who refuse to speak or who are afraid to speak. So I'd like to be speaking on behalf of them. And this isn't only a Japan problem. There's currently an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission investigation underway in our New York office. And that is, those people, that issue is reporting to the same Tokyo management as myself. So this goes beyond Japan. When I think about Governor Koike's plan to make Tokyo a financial capital, I think it's a great idea. And in fact, when I was here 20 years ago, Tokyo was really a financial capital in Asia. And we lost that to Hong Kong and Singapore mainly. I think it's a wonderful plan, but when I look at issues like this that are stagnant and that are, frankly, 20th century type of issues that Japanese management are struggling with and that people are facing head-on in the midst of government policy, which is trying to push them in the opposite direction, which is encouraging people to take paternity and maternity leave, I find it shocking, and I find it very difficult to believe that Governor Koike's plan could actually be accomplished. Also, when I think about even our management, there's a movement, as you may know, in Japan, ikubos sengen, is something that the Ministry of Labor here is promoting. Basically, it's for company management to step up and say, we support maternity and paternity leave. We want our employees to have children and be able to come back and continue their career. But in fact, and our boss, Nagaoka Shacho, actually made that just in May this year, and you can find that on the internet, where he made that announcement, and yet here we are. There's a big gap between perception and reality that I'd like to highlight as well. Women are basically baby factories and treated as such, and that I find appalling, to be honest, unacceptable. There was a story just past weekend about a little girl in Japan who had to dye her hair black to go to school. She was born with brown hair, but the rule at the school was that only students with black hair could come to school. So she was forced to dye her hair. When I was reading that, having been in Japan for such a long time, frankly, I wasn't surprised, but I was still very disappointed. And I can't help but draw the parallels between that situation and the situation at hand. It's old-fashioned ways of thinking and old-fashioned rules that by global standards are completely out of date and frankly are human rights issues that need to be addressed immediately. Lastly, I would just say ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance is what it stands for. ESG investing is a key theme in the investment community today. Many of the new dollars that are coming into asset managers are dedicated to ESG type investing. So investors are very keen to know social policies of the firm. And in this case, I've already heard rumors that some firms have stopped trading because of that, because of this issue. And this is only going to expand. And for Morgan Stanley and Mitsubishi and Union Bank to have their name associated with such very poor social policies is frankly shocking. And I really hope that I can be a voice to help people that are struggling with this. With that, I'll turn it over to Q&A, and please feel free to ask Imaizumi-san any questions you might have, or Timothy or myself. But again, thank you very, very much for coming today.
Okay, so I'd like to open it up now for questions from press. Okay. Would you give your name and affiliation? Because
my name is Magdalena Osumi. I'm from the Japan Times, and I would like to ask you two questions. I would like to ask your personal situation and why. I think that readers would like to know why you are the only person that can raise your child, and why why the mother of the child cannot do that. And the second one is what are your expectations from the company, like with this legal action and the suit against the company?
Thank you very much. In terms of my partner, it is a personal issue, and I won't go into detail. It's her personal information as well. I'd only say that we came to an agreement, a very amicable agreement, that I would raise my son here in Japan. And, there are many single parents in Japan, millions in fact, so it's not a strange thing. But I'll leave it at that for now. In terms of what we're asking for from the company, it's very simple. We're saying that I'm able and willing to do my job. Please give me my job back, and please reinstate my salary. Mm-hmm. We're not asking for anything more than that.
Thank you. I'd like to ask one additional question. So,
Please.
is the mother? So the mother of the child isn't in Japan, is my understanding.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I have a couple. I was wondering, well, actually, quite a few, because it seems, like I was saying earlier, there's the layers of lack of coherent policy.
Yes.
What the Tokyo government is saying is similar, but again different from what Abe has said about getting more children in this country. It's also sort of a gender bias issue, because shouldn't it be the mother raising the child, and why should the father have any rights? Is that legal in Japan, Mr. Imaizumi? I was just wondering. Is it also assumed by the law that the woman should raise the child, for example? And of course, this is completely unacceptable if the corporation says it is of global standards. So, you have the internal Japanese law. It's very difficult to understand. Everybody seems to be saying something slightly different. So, if I could have
法律
all
上で
three
は
of
不
you.
死家庭でも母子家庭でも同じ扱いですか？
法律では同じ。では
So whether it's a single
So-
father or single mother in Japan, the laws are the same.
三菱はじゃあ何を、こう正当化してるんですか？要するに父親だから、仕事を休んではいけないと言ってるわけではなく
てですね、
何がはい
結局その父子関係を証明するものがなかったじゃないかというのが彼らの最初の言い分です。お父さんと子供の関係を証明しろということを言ってきて、育休を認めなかったということですね。
Oh, okay. So the explanation is that Mitsubishi was not.
They didn't believe that I was the father of the baby.
Yes.
And they
So
wanted
it
proof of
wasn't a
fatherhood
male
before
issue. It
they-
wasn't because he is the father that he should not take time from work. It was because he could not prove that he was the father. But if you were the legal guardian, what does it matter? Why does the DNA come into it? 法的にはもし父親、その血のつながりがなくても、法的にはアメリカでは父親として認められている人をなぜ三菱が DNA のテストを受けさせたんですか？
それは、どうしてかっていうのはいろいろ理由はあると思うんですけど、一つは無知だったという可能性は否定できないと思います。そういう証明がなくても育休というのは申し出た時点でそれ自体が有効になりますけれども、それに対して証拠を求めること自体が法的にはおかしいことなんですが、それについて、もしかすると知識がなかった可能性はなくはないんですけれどもね。
Oh, okay. So possibly Mitsubishi did not understand the law when they insisted on the blood test, because it wouldn't be required if the man is already the legally declared guardian, whether they're blood related or not. Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Hi. Any other questions from the floor? And anything else that comes to mind that may help us to understand this issue more? Be very welcome. 他に先生からも何かコメントございましたら。非常に複雑ですね。法律はいくつもあるんじゃないですか？法
律自体は育児介護休業法っていう、法律自体は一つなんですが、それにのっとった対応をきちっとしてこなかったという問題だと思いますけどね。
Okay, so the lawyer is arguing strictly on the basis of what the father would have been entitled to in terms of taking time off. I was reading all sorts of complex international issues into it, but for the time being, the court case is simply about his rights as a father to have taken time off for the child. Okay. And another question to Mr. Wood, or both
Please.
of you. What does Morgan Stanley, did you talk to personnel, human resources at Morgan Stanley?
Right. So the relationship between Morgan Stanley and Mitsubishi is quite a complicated one. Dependent on the business lines, in some cases we are partners, and in other cases we're competitors. So in the equities business, for example, that I'm involved in, Morgan Stanley team is actually our competitor. So for me to go and speak with Morgan Stanley management about this would not be allowed.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right. I believe they would have a very, very different approach and very, very different opinion on this issue.
So
And that's part of
hypothetically,
what
Oh, sorry.
I'm also emphasizing, is that for the two companies to be working so closely together and yet have so diverse corporate cultures, one in the 21st century and one in the 20th century, is obviously problematic.
so you were talking about ESG.
Yes.
So hypothetically, somebody at the next meeting of Morgan Stanley, some investor could say, hey, what's going on in Tokyo?
Exactly.
Okay.
In fact, I believe that's already been said.
Oh, okay.
If I can add perhaps a little bit of flavor here, much of this is speculative, we're not sure, but I think the interesting part of Mr. Wood's case is that although he was attempting to do the right thing according to what the company policies were and trying to not jam the process, in fact, what he's suffering from is a hammer that comes down because you are supposed to do what management tells you to do, and we only deal with one kind of product, an employee, and you're supposed to fit that mold. And if you don't fit that mold, then we don't need to deal with you. It's too much trouble. You don't fit the right kind of characteristics. Your hair isn't black enough. So we get you out one way or the other. And the interesting part of the situation here, and the reason why I've been involved with Mr. Wood for over a year, is to prevent it from coming to this stage. We've seen this in many companies, and in particular the bigger companies, the older styled companies, where their tools of management are rather limited. They use intimidation, they use fear, they use bullying, they use these kinds of things. And what happened with Mr. Wood is a perfect example of that. It's just a form of harassment that is meant as a tool of management, and it's just overapplied and inappropriate in this case. And the funny thing about it is that although women have been suffering from this management tool for years and years and years, it takes a foreigner who is a single parent to actually bring it to light. So there are a lot of women that are applauding Mr. Wood's stand-upishness to this issue and to make a claim. So
At the end of the day, it's a very, very old way of dealing with employees, right? You're viewed as a soldier. And if you have any infirmity at all, you're basically meant to either leave the company or commit suicide. That's the bottom line. And if you don't do either of those, then we harass you until you choose to leave, or we can force you out by some other means. Mm-hmm. And that line of thinking, frankly, is not going to make it in the global economy. And it's not appropriate for many issues, and in particular with the societal issues that Japan is facing today, with no children, with an aging society. It flies directly in the face of those new policies and what the government is trying to do.
Mm-hmm. One other point, if I may, it might answer your question. It's not as if Mr. Wood was subpar performance or just kind of a normal performer. He wasn't. He received the highest ratings that they issued. He was earning millions and millions of dollars for Mitsubishi year upon year. So it wasn't like he was a slacker or anything like that. He was performing. It was just the fact that he decided to have a child, and you're not supposed to do that.
The revenues that my team generated over the years I was there, approximately $240 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Milt?
Yes, my question is, when they granted you the leave in December of 2015, what was their basis of granting that leave?
Right, so I had to work through several lawyers, actually, and we got opinion papers from Hello Work, and we also got an opinion directly from the Ministry of Labor. And we showed them that, and in fact, the opinion was one, you don't need a boshitecho. Two, if you have a DNA test, which isn't necessary either, but if you have that, then there's absolutely no reason not to grant this leave. So upon that, in December, they asked me to resubmit the application with a copy of the DNA test that I was officially the father. And at that point, they decided to approve.
Okay, but there's a gap from when the child was born.
Right.
That's right.
And they didn't do anything
No.
about that? I think that's one of the points of
Sure.
contentions you can make.
Yes.
I mean, you can't change the DNA of yourself or the baby
That's right.
in the 3 months.
That's right.
I mean, I think that's a major point of contention, I think, that you should dwell on.
Agreed.
Because
And we have.
they admitted that it is your child, so hey, your child that doesn't start in December, it started back when the child was born.
That's right. And their reasoning was they can't go back and change the papers.
Oh, yes, they can if they wanted to. They
That's
just
right.
don't want to do it,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Yeah.
They said they cannot do that. I argued that and had several meetings with them about that, and said I don't like the fact that on my HR record it says Kekking. It says absent from work, and in fact it wasn't Kekking. You're now admitting that I can take paternity leave, so why can't we back it up until the baby was born? No, they refused. They refused.
One more thing is, you said that they gave you a menial job. Obviously, you were still getting paid at that menial job, but they just wanted to move you aside, right?
That's right.
Didn't want you to participate where you were before.
Exactly.
Is there any law against that? Just move somebody and lower their pay? You know, I think they've got to have good cause to do that, and I don't think they can prove that.
No. Well, the other kind of interesting part of this is that working at Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley was a bit of a pressure cooker. So the amount of hours that you devote to doing that, I mean, Mr. Wood showed up at work at sometimes before 6 o'clock in the morning and stayed till 11. And they implemented a process where the Labor Ministry, who received the records of the work, were otherwise informed that the work hours were a little bit more compressed. But it was a pressure cooker. The telephones, the BlackBerries that were issued were purposely given a lower capacity of data so that if you're not answering your emails, it was also in the email server, that if you don't answer your emails and the cache becomes full, then it gets bounced back. And so the person who sent you an email or a bid document or something like that gets a bounce back and they go, oh, I guess he was fired or something. Why would they do that? So the capacity required that you respond to emails every day because it would fill up within a day. So you had to sleep with your BlackBerries as well. And I think one of the reasons why he ran into trouble was because you're supposed to work all the time. You have the labor law requirement for working, 9 to 5, but this is a big deal. You're supposed to work for us as a soldier all the time, and if you have a baby, that's going to impinge, and we don't want you. We want another cog in the wheel.
To answer your question about the legal issue, the law says that when someone takes paternity or maternity leave, upon return, they're to be given their job back at the same pay. So that also is an issue. You cannot just
According
demote
to
somebody.
the
for
way
taking
they're looking
paternity
at
leave.
it, it's the menial job, right? Not the former position that you were in.
Well, that's right. There's no reason to not return me to my original position.
Yeah, but they're not accepting those 3 months when you had the big job versus the menial job. So what is there, I mean, this is not going to be a win or lose. It's going to be a big compromise on both sides, right? Japanese courts will prolong it forever. So when you really get down to it, from October to December is the clinch. Because when did they move you to the menial job?
When I returned, so in March.
In March. That's the first time
That's the first time they did it.
and you weren't paid because it was paternity leave, right?
Paternity leave, you receive a fraction of your compensation, but not from the company, through Harawaku.
I don't know how your bonus system worked, but you must have missed out on a bonus.
0 bonus they gave me.
Well, I think, you have a lot of things going for you, but it's a lot of paperwork, so I guess you have a good lawyer, so I think, you've got lots of points of contention.
Thank you.
And the best wishes to you, because it is a major breakthrough if Mitsubishi can be put down on something like this.
Thank you.
Here's some of the paperwork that's backing the claim that was filed last week. And there's a mountain of it.
Yeah, there's thousands of pages of evidence that we've...
You have all of your evaluations and everything.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct. As well as hours of recorded conversations.
Yeah.
And 9 to 5 is for normal people. If you're in the finance business, it's a 24-hour job. So, I mean, you're used to all this.
Mm-hmm.
And couldn't understand. The people at the labor ministry, they just have to close the blind eye, and that's why they get paid big bucks.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
That's one of the reasons. That's right.
But if I have one more question then. Isn't this a particularly bad time for Mitsubishi to be fighting a case like this when they've had so many deaths from overwork? It's not unique to the
Yeah.
finance industry. It's happening in the construction industry. It's happening in the media industry. And then, of course, America, is all awash with the harassment case. So it's a combination of these tidal waves of awareness, not change yet, but awareness. Mm-hmm. It seems a particularly kind of fraught time to be dealing with these kind of issues. So would they just maybe be in a hurry, or is it going to take time for them to even assess the developments?
Did Mitsubishi just lose a bunch of court cases in the U.S.? Harassment cases, a couple $1 million in the New York office or something?
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Well, I'll refrain from commenting too much, but it is a global issue in some cases. In this case, it's you're right. There's been the Dentsu case. There's been Mitsubishi Electric. There've been case after case, and on the governance side now there's Kobe Steel in the news. It is a time I would say to make progress. Mm-hmm. And I hope we can really move the needle forward. I love Japan, and I want to see Japan succeed.
but like you said, you weren't asking too much. Just give me my job back.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that was after he was brought in to resuscitate the equities branch. So he was the creator of the global equities division. Under him, he hired 40 people in 6 different geographies just from scratch. So it was a big contribution to the bottom line.
I think we had another question here. Yes.
I would like to ask you one more thing about your situation. What were the grounds for putting you on this unpaid leave? How did the company explain it to you?
Yeah, no, it's very confusing, to be honest, but I'll tell you what I know. As I mentioned earlier, they called me in and said, okay, the doctors have said you're fine to go back to work, but we're not going to give you your job back. We're going to give you this job instead. And the job was, frankly, a very low-level job. Again, my compensation would be cut by more than 50%. And I said, no, that's not acceptable. That's not legal. It's not acceptable. And those were the grounds, the fact that I rejected that offer, those were the grounds, as far as I understand, for them to move and put me on unpaid leave.
Right.
I never signed any document. I never saw any document.
Right.
It came via their lawyer, and it was black and white. Mm-hmm. We're not going to negotiate.
A company like Mitsubishi, in this instance, you can see is very bold, very dogmatic. It's our way or the highway. We don't negotiate with terrorists. So you do what we tell you to do, especially if you're an employee, or get out. And that's been the Glenwood experience, that even formal papers haven't been provided. This is your notice. This is what you're supposed to do under the company rules. This is an explanation. they're so big that they feel like they can do anything.
It's the new vampire squid.
Okay, any comments to wrap up? Anything from, oh. Thank you. From either of you, any more questions? I think.
If you have anything that you'd like to just ask me personally, I'll be up here for a while. I'm happy to speak to any of you individually.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time today.
I think we'll all be keeping an eye on this case.
Yes.
So,
Thank you very much.
Like they said, if you have any more questions, they're going to be in the club for a while, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.